Hi, everyone. My name is Martina Yopo Díaz. I am assistant professor at the School of Sociology at Universidad in Chile, and I am very excited to be here with you today to have a very timely discussion about ethics of self-care. Care is complex. It means different things to different people in different contexts. Today, I would like to explore one particular aspect of care, and that is the ethics of self care in women's lived experiences negotiating pregnancy and the transition to motherhood in contemporary Chile. On March 2nd, the New York Times published an article titled Defective Birth Control Blamed for Scores of Unplanned Pregnancies in Chile. This article addressed a recent controversial case in which the public health system delivered and then quietly recalled almost 280,000 potentially flawed packets of birth control pills. By that time, at least 140 women believe that they got pregnant because of that error. This case, which may seem quite unique, is by no means an exception of the politics of contraception and reproductive rights in Chilean society. To a great extent, due to the legacy of conservative Catholic values, women in Chile have struggled for decades to be able to access contraception, determine their fertility, and achieve reproductive autonomy. Just to mention a few examples, a law passed in 2010 established the right to access emergency contraception. However, to date, many women are impeded from using the day after pill because of the lack of medical services in some areas of the country and because some health professionals refuse to prescribe the pill because of their own personal beliefs. Until 2017, Chile had one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the world, where any form of voluntary termination of pregnancy was considered a crime and punished with prison sentences. Despite this multiple constraints to reproductive agency, and very much consistent with neoliberal reforms implemented since the 1970s by the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, women in Chile are increasingly expected to control their sexuality, manage the risk of pregnancy, and become responsible for their reproductive outcomes. To explore the particular meanings and practices of self-care in women's lived experiences negotiating pregnancy, I conducted live story interviews with 40 women living in urban Santiago de Chile. This study was part of my PhD research on changes in the transition to motherhood in contemporary Chile and was carried out between 2015 and 2019. The notion of self-care, which in Spanish is cuidarse, has become prevalent to the ways in which women refer to contraception as a means of managing the risk of pregnancy and controlling their fertility. In the interviews I conducted, women often use expressions such as me cuido, I take care of myself, and yo siempre me cuidé, I always took care of myself, to explain the ways in which they had control over their fertility and avoided pregnancy when they did not intend to have children. Consistently, some of them also use expressions such as no me cuidé, I didn't take care of myself, and tendría que haberme cuidado, I should have taken care of myself, to explain pregnancies that occur at times different to what they would have wanted or expected. In Chile, cuidarse has become not only a way to talk about the use of contraception to manage the risk of pregnancy, but also a social expectation and a moral mandate. Women are often expected to care for themselves and assume the responsibility of their reproductive outcomes. This very particular notion of self-care involves both the idea of caring for oneself and being accountable for one's behavior. I decided to go to the gynecologist because I didn't want to have children, so I had to take care of myself, said Elena, a 40-year-old upper-class woman. I know that you always have to take care of yourself because you never know what might happen, said Maite, a 20-year-old middle-class woman. Underlying this ethics of self-care is the overall understanding that now, unlike before, all women can care for themselves. Due to the increasing availability and social legitimacy of contraception, it is often argued that all women can determine if and when to get pregnant. Now, there are a lot more methods to take care of yourself. That is why I can't understand that young women nowadays just keep having children, said Esther, a 40-year-old lower-class woman. If mothers don't take care of themselves, it's because they don't want to, because now there are a lot more opportunities than before, said Maria, a 74-year-old middle-class woman. The generalized assumption that self-care in negotiating pregnancy has become just a matter of personal will neglects the significant social and institutional constraints that women continue to face to access contraception and practice abortion as means of exerting reproductive agency. This is the case of Manuela, a 36-year-old lower-class woman who had her first child when she was 17 years old, which was, in her own words, a lot earlier than expected. In making sense of her experience negotiating self-care in the transition to motherhood, she told me, I couldn't tell my mom that she had to take me to the matron or the gynecologist. I couldn't. So how could I take care of myself? I really couldn't. Moreover, I was underaged. If I went to the pharmacy to buy contraceptives, they wouldn't sell them to me because I was underaged. Despite prevalent and multiple constraints to reproductive agency, women who experience unwanted or unplanned pregnancies are deemed irresponsible and criticized for their inability to determine if and when to get pregnant. People are irresponsible because today in the hospital they give you the condoms. So it's a little bit crazy to be pregnant at such young ages. If today you get pregnant, it's because you want to, said Maite, the 20-year-old middle-class woman. No one told them to get pregnant, especially now that there are so many methods to avoid pregnancies. I believe that girls that get pregnant today are irresponsible, said Irene, a 64-year-old lower-class woman. Reproductive outcomes that are perceived as a matter of personal will and individual responsibility are one of the main reasons why some women reject abortion. For them, it is not just about protecting the life of the child, but also about the fact that women must be held accountable for their wrongdoings. If you messed up because you were horny, you are screwed. You're just going to have the baby and be responsible, said Maite, the 20-year-old middle-class woman. Deep down, you have to take charge for your own actions. So if you're going to have sex and have a great time and afterwards you say, oh, I'm going to have abortion? No, said Consuelo, a 30-year-old middle-class woman. To conclude, I draw on Foucauldian theories of self-care and also feminist critiques on neoliberal governmentality to argue that the transition to motherhood in Chile is shaped by neoliberal accounts of reproductive agency that outline women as autonomous, rational, and self-regulated agents while neglecting structural constraints that affect whether and when to have children. Through this particular neoliberal ethics, self-care becomes not only, as Lord says, an act of political warfare, but also a means of subjection that reinforces the feminization of reproduction, the privatization of care, and class inequalities in enacting reproductive agency. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Hi, welcome to my paper. It's a pleasure to be part of the Social Life of Care conference. My name is Dr. Susan MacDougall. I'm in social anthropology at the University of Cambridge, and I'm giving this paper on queering care. And this paper is punctuated with a series of slides that are taken from my personal social media landscape that I think give an ambient sense of some of the issues that I'm talking about. It's based on the observation that I have, which I think my social media feed can help frame, although there are a lot of other sources for this, that complaint about care work is very common. This is one little piece of evidence from this. This is a woman, Tiffany, who, other friends of mine, women in their 30s who have children, like and follow, who chronicles her adventures of kind of being at home in the pandemic with a young son. And this is one comment that she made. A thing I never realized about being an adult is that you will always be cleaning your kitchen. No matter if you get takeout, no matter if you're gone all day, you will be cleaning the kitchen. You can see the kind of taste of fatigue here. And so my observation that complaint about care work is common is followed with an analytical inference that care work is undervalued, and that this partially explains why complaining about it is so acceptable in public fora. My aspiration in this paper is to explore whether scholarship on care can treat ethnographic evidence of complaint about care work in a way that doesn't unwittingly reinforce the tendency to value this work as somehow less dignified or stimulating than paid work. Undervaluing care work has its roots in feminist history. This comes from the academy as well as from outside of it. As Susan Ferguson points out, the equality feminism of Mary Wollstonecraft and her contemporaries located women's oppression in their lack of access to waged work, during a time when waged work was the way that most men were earning a living. Women had to rely on men for economic support, and therefore men controlled them and their unwaged labor in the home. Paid work represented a path out of this inequality. This was a feminism of upper-class women, and it did not take the inherent oppressions of being other than upper class into account. Many contemporary feminisms embody the same blindness to the structural obstacles represented by an unequal economic system. One contemporary manifestation of this class-blind feminism follows the, quote, the lean-in paradigm of Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg, which lauds individual women's efforts to climb professional and political ladders and advocates for enabling more women to pursue this ladder climbing with more support and more validation, and ideally with less sexism and racism. This approach is decidedly unradical, even as it has been adapted considerably after criticism followed the publication of the initial volume. It simply asks that women and people from minoritized backgrounds be given a bit of a boost to make their journey upward more closely approximate a white male journey. And so you can see here in this Instagram post from the Lean In org that things like enabling women to better meet deadlines and keep up with projects is really how the response to this kind of feminism and this organization in particular has responded to the kind of crisis of care that's arisen around the COVID-19 pandemic and the unequal burden of care that this has put on women and people in caring roles in their households, no matter their gender. I'm sure you all remember this advert well. This was an advert from the United Kingdom, the UK government, that appeared very briefly as a way of encouraging people to embrace the lockdown and stay home. As you can see, it depicts mostly women picking up that additional care burden, which was rapidly criticized and led to this advert being taken down. But I believe it does reflect what we actually are seeing in practice in terms of how household labor has been distributed. In the UK, as well as elsewhere, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the importance of care work and the problems of leaving it in the shadows into rather sharp relief. In large part, our need for care in its face-to-face form has persisted even as our other functions have moved online, been cancelled, or otherwise adapted to fit our pandemic lifestyles. And as Alan, Jenkins, and Howard have pointed out, the people filling this gap, are disproportionately female and disproportionately from minoritized groups, whether within the home or in paid employment. Their disproportionate exposure to COVID-19 and society's non-negotiable reliance on their work for its continued functioning is harder to ignore now than it has been in the past. From a social reproduction perspective, the crisis of care COVID brought on is quite unsurprising. Prior to the pandemic, Nancy Fraser was already writing about the way capitalism's singular interest in production, as opposed to social reproduction, simply in paid rather than in unpaid labor, bakes constant crises into its makeup. Silvia Federici has argued that capitalism's establishment created, quote, a new patriarchal order based upon the exclusion of women from waged work and their subordination to men. In some sense, capitalism and the family forms that it demanded delivered to us the ideal of the heterosexual nuclear family, with its unequal divisions of labor, of care labor in particular. Academic insight, however, does not seem to have infused our daily behaviors and discourses with any greater respect for the routine work of carrying out social reproduction. This is an autoethnographic observation as much as one drawn from the literature and from my own ethnographic work in Jordan. We are eager to redeem the people doing social reproduction, and eager to critique the structures of power that make female, non-white, non-wealthy bodies more likely to be doing that work than male. And here we can see that this is not purely a gendered dynamic. This is a cartoon from a popular Jordanian cartoonist, Osama Hajjaj, and it's a depiction of what happens on Labor Day. And it shows one individual, one sort of, we assume, more privileged male individual who spends his Labor Day ordering around people who work in different maintenance roles. You can see someone cleaning, someone delivering food, someone serving coffee, various people sort of working on keeping the house in order, who are all hard at work on this day. And one individual sort of saying, can you please, bring me some more coffee, bring me some more of this, and work on the satellite because I feel like watching the match tonight. So yeah, this valuing of certain people as entitled to rest from their work, whereas others are not entitled to rest from their work, is really captured in this cartoon and shows how it is not purely a gendered dynamic, right? Gender is just one layer of the way that these things are unequal. Redeeming reproductive work itself, though, is a more complicated, more ambivalent project. Complaints about housework and the performance of housework are both among the ways that women perform femininity. Cross-culturally resonant conversations about how housework gets distributed within households reflect the power of this norm, even as people orientate toward that norm in diverse ways. This norm of sort of a sexual division of labor between male paid work, female reproductive work. Again, this cartoon reinforces that this is itself an ambivalent boundary. But in discussing this, I pick up on Butler's idea of gender as a performance. But what theoretical openings exist to decouple these ideas of being a woman and cleaning up around the house or looking after children or performing care work generally? What if care could be queered, that is, separated from specifically sexed bodies? As someone who counts housewifery as a research interest, I have had the pleasure of presenting my work on the lives of working-class Jordanian women's daily routines to diverse audiences. One element that I continuously have trouble framing and presenting is the finding that looking after homes and children can be draining and degrading. Women do not necessarily feel this way about their own housework all the time, but Jordanian discourses about housewifery acknowledge and lament the drudgery of cooking, cleaning, and chasing children around, even as they valorize the family structures and values that women's unpaid labor enables. In my anecdotal experience, anthropological audiences, in the tradition of Middle East anthropology especially, owe a debt of gratitude to a generation of scholars whose work on women in women's spaces, and I'm thinking here of Cynthia Nelson, Laila Abulurud, Diane Singerman, Anne Manaley, and many others, was devoted to undermining the binary of production and reproduction, mapped onto the binary of public and private, that valued men's contributions above women's. Marilyn Strathern characterized this kind of conflict, wherein anthropology's agenda of recognizing different life worlds as equally sensible and dignified runs up against feminism's agenda of deliberately pursuing equality for women, equality defined in culturally specific terms, often with a Western reference, right? She defined this conflict as one between anthropology and feminism. In short, faithfully representing the life worlds of others, for Strathern, means refraining from projecting onto them feminist agendas that are not meaningful in those life worlds. While taking Marilyn Strathern's insights into account, my particular challenge of representing Jordanian women's apathy to housework makes me think that the problem is inverted. How, in an anthropological tradition that valorizes women's lives in domestic space as a point of cultural pride, can I write in the complaint that this work is also often experienced as drudgery? The established groove of writing Arab women's worlds as separate, equal, and powerful runs up against the commonly shared reality that much of the work carried out in those spaces is uncompensated in a capitalist system and socially undervalued in ways that reflect the power of money to endow work with prestige. How, then, as an ethnographer, can I represent both the respect that Jordanian women have for housekeeping as a skill and the bitterness that sometimes arises that they are the ones that have to do it, while also making clear that I see this bitterness as at least in part an effect of the toxic attitudes our global economic system holds toward any kind of work that takes place in the domestic sphere? I see some potential for this in the admittedly problematic concept of self-care. Self-care is an ostensibly neutral term, referring to practices one performs on oneself to simply stay reasonably functional. And you can see a bit of the poisonous edges of it in these excerpts from my social media feed. Indication that self-care Sunday for working mothers means basically fulfilling other people's needs, or that self-care is something that can be fulfilled by simply eating junk food quickly. Right, there's a sort of risk that things that are mere coping mechanisms could be subsumed under the heading of self-care. Self-care reaches its finest expression, though, in Silicon Valley workplaces. As anthropologist Jan English-Luke has chronicled, these workplace cultures make extraordinarily high demands of their workers in terms of productivity, and in exchange, self-care amenities like on-site yoga and healthful meals, opportunities to socialize with colleagues, are considered part of fair exchange rather than some kind of workplace perk. English-Luke rightly points out that this logic has some sinister theoretical implications, which are hinted at in some of these memes as well. First, the term itself has the power to render basic maintenance tasks as both an indulgence and a further obligation. Self-care, as lived in practice in African America as well, is more than anything a consumption habit, purchased with disposable income and selected with tastes specific to a certain class sensibility. There's nothing necessarily liberatory about self-care as practiced in these ways. It's not necessarily conceived of as a liberatory or resistant discourse. But implicit in this new contract, where workplaces provide caring resources as part of the exchange they make with workers for their productive labor, is an acknowledgement that production and reproduction are not divisible into different spheres entirely. Silicon Valley corporations like the ones English-Luke worked in and with have declared that each individual has to perform both production and reproduction in order to remain functional as a worker. That is, they note that care is essential and that it needs performing for and by each individual. A small foundation has been laid for argument that each individual's need for care must be fulfilled in order for the economy to function. Imagine one were to appropriate this notion of self-care as a theoretical category, something self-evidently present in most social contexts. What if self-care were an expected dimension of every individual's experience? Norming self-care as a basic, everyday practice, enabling each of us to go about our days, could open up new ethnographic insights. For example, performance artist Trisha Hersey of the NAP ministry, represented in this quote here, has argued that Black Americans' inheritance of overwork, a legacy of racism and enslavement, has made rest a profoundly political act of resistance to capitalism and white supremacy. Her insight was inspired by historical observation that her enslaved ancestors were not given the right to rest. The Jordanian cartoon we saw earlier points to the insights that open up when we look at the distribution of rest and to the potential for the lens of self-care in helping us spot and critique inequalities without making negative value judgments about domestic work. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Good morning. We thank the organizers of the Social Life of Care Conference for giving us this opportunity. Our paper is titled Self-Care as a Public Act of Mothering, Ethnography of an Online Parenting Support Group. It is jointly presented by me, Smitha, Nair, and Rajesh Kalarivayil. We start by acknowledging that we are partners and have been together for over a decade and married for 9 years. We are parents to a 3-year-old girl. She was born to us after 5 years of our marriage. For the purpose of this paper, we will be referring to her as AP. Autoethnographies are highly personalized accounts that draw from the experiences of the author for the purpose of extending sociological understanding. The irony of two people writing an autoethnography is not lost on us. However, this paper is an effort to talk about the experiences, conversation, and practices that we had as part of being members of our online parenting group. In this paper, we examine how online groups provide a space for self-care. We argue that online support groups and communities are emerging as spaces for mothers to experiment and articulate of self-care as an essential and liberatory practice in mothering. We highlight that examining online groups can give significant insights into understanding the evolving notions of mothering and radical self-care practices in the virtual space. Motherhood, mothering, and self-care. The cultural notion of motherhood often shaped lived realities of mothers. The heteronormative patriarchal institution of motherhood is male-defined and is infused with beliefs and expectations from mothering practices that are deeply oppressive to mothers. The social expectations of motherhood from every woman is oppressive and compromises women's independence. The patriarchal construct of motherhood is constantly employed to ensure that public-private domain is separated and mother remains confined to the private domain. And she also has the responsibility of continuing these patriarchal values and beliefs to the next generation. Many authors have highlighted the different kinds of experience of mothering which are highly influenced by the institution of motherhood. Intensive mothering characterizes patriarchal motherhood, which views mothering as entirely child-centered, emotionally involving, and taking on the responsibility of child alone without a complaint. This institutionalized motherhood produces what Foucault refers to as discourses of knowledge, and they are discourses of the good mother. The good mother behaves in a way that is considered acceptable behavior, constantly under surveillance, and with a compulsion to reproduce appropriate behavior. The role expectations from the mother in this ideology is to ignore their own needs and focus entirely on the child. The counter-narrative to this institutionalized motherhood argues that mothering can be an empowering experience and has to be understood from a gendered lens. The embodied experience of the mother must be given importance. This experience of mothering is female-defined and focused on empowering women. Feminist mothering focuses on agency and independence of the woman that is denied to them by institutional motherhood. It believes in the idea that mothers and children benefit and lead enriching lives if there is a focus on mothers' selfhood when they are meeting their own needs, believe in shared parenting, do not take the sole responsibility of raising child, and taking anti-sexist stance that do not believe in patriarchal child-rearing practices. Radical self-care, as we argue, is essential to this understanding of empowered mothering. Self-care is self-preservation to ensure that women are talking of themselves and their needs. It's a multidimensional concept consisting of physical, mental, social, emotional, financial, and psychological aspects. Self-esteem, self-worth are essential to self-care. This self-care is a deeper act of self-preservation and cannot exist in vacuum, and is interconnected with the structural, familial institutions that are part of women's life. Self-care is a radical act against the patriarchal construct of the good mother and against the social expectations of intensive mothering. It is essential for mother's selfhood and to understand mothering as an empowering and not essential to a woman's life. Self-care and self-love are all based on the ideas of respect, love, care, dignity, rights, and justice. It is a public and political act to choose and change one's life. Online mothering, a cultural representation. Internet has become a part of everyday life for many Internet has become a part of the everyday life for many, integrated with our daily lives. There are parenting support groups online that have created space for new environments where experiences of motherhood and mothering are performed, articulated, and negotiated. Online groups for pregnant women and mothering groups function at the intersections of biosocialities, socialities, and technosocialities with the presence of social capital within it. These groups are spaces where online and offline lives, intertwine with each other, creating a thin line between the private and public spaces. The online groups may be private groups or open groups based on the membership criteria and purpose. The embodied knowledge of other women is found to be important as there is a shared sense of we-ness, interpersonal ties, community building, and social purpose. Genetia and Modern Cross have identified 3 types of communication that contribute and maintain social capital in mothering groups: emotional support, instrumental support, and community building and protection. These groups also create a space for wider discussion and have shown to be a space in which dominant discourses of motherhood are challenged, negotiated, and redefined. In this paper, we discuss our observations and experiences of being part of an online parenting group. For the purpose of this paper, we will be referring to it as a village or AV. This is done to maintain the anonymity of the group and its group members. AV, the structure and norms. AV is a Facebook private group which consists of 32K plus members. It has a membership criteria, that is, you're supposed to be a mother or an expectant mother. The admins ask you, there are a number of questions which have to be answered to be accepted into the group. It defines itself as a feminist group because it believes it is pro-choice, it believes in the idea that women can support women, and also believes in the equal responsibilities of partners in childcare. The gatekeeping features with moderators and administrators are there to scrutinize and approve memberships and posts and moderate comments. This makes sure that the posts and comments are in line with the basic ideological tenets of the group. The scrutiny is also important to ensure that the group adheres to the Facebook community rules. Many of the members start their posts with the statement, "I have decided to write here because this group will not judge me." This not being judged becomes an important aspect of engaging with an online group. This was one of the reasons we continue to stay and engage with the group, more so passively than actively. There are a number of norms that have to be followed. The kind of posts that exist on the group are suggestion posts, which ranges from products to schools, doctors, and other services that are of everyday importance to the participants. Went out posts where participants talk about members talk about their frustrations. These posts are mostly related to frustrations of family members, children, neighbors, officials, schools. Happy posts include posts that members are excited and happy about, or achievements. Achievements here is subjected to what the member feels as important and significant as part of their lives. General posts, everyday questions which include anything that the member feels is important and pressing that they want to share, discuss. Weekly posts include that are designated for a particular purpose, which are participatory in nature, which helps the members to engage with each other. The group rules discourage these posts on a daily basis because they believe that this will result in important posts being ignored or overlooked. Posts for specific purposes. This set of posts includes topics such as politics, job opportunities, and discussions related to current and other pressing issues. The group specifies that a single thread should be maintained for contentious and debatable topics to ensure that there is a space for all pros and duplication of discussions don't happen. Anonymous posts are to help the members to share private issues that they're not comfortable sharing in the open. The posts are shared by the admin. The identity of the author is not revealed. These posts are often accompanied by trigger warnings and reminders that the members should remember that the group is pro-choice, believes in women's rights and LGBTQ rights. Often they also include resources for the members. Anonymity and moderation are one of the important aspects of the group, which ensures that people are able to talk about emotional and ethical dilemmas that they are facing in their everyday lives. Moderation also helps to ensure that there are no harsh comments or victim blaming in the groups, which is part of the policy of the group. We became part of the village after we were invited by a friend, and interestingly, it was I became a part of this group first, and I started resonating some of the posts, ideas that were on the group. Also, my own frustrations were getting validated in the group, and that is why I invited Rajesh to be a part of this group, because I wanted to make him understand the context in which I was talking about my experiences. Also to understand how people are interacting, engaging with each other, and also to see what are the common areas, commonalities of experiences that we are all facing with each other. Rajesh, on the other hand, were reluctantly joined the group, but immediately participated after he started understanding his own frustrations where he was away from the child, or was trying to understand my frustrations with the parenting. So this is the way we started engaging with the group. The group became part of our everyday discussions and everyday engagements. We started seeing different themes around which self-care was being articulated in these posts, and they are: me time, a lens to discovering the individual. Many When posts discuss the importance of personal time as break from expected duties and the need for me time. These discussions range from the importance of personal time, partners and other members of the household contributing to childcare, strategies mothers can employ to have me time. Many members post about their interest or creative endeavors. The When posts about partners not helping out or expectations that women should do all the household work along with managing child single-handedly. This has been for working as well as stay-at-home mothers. The comments agree that the socialization in a patriarchal society has high expectations from women that they will put household before themselves and continue to do all the work no matter how tired or ill. Most common suggestion that comes up in this are: leave things done undone. Nothing catastrophic will happen if things don't get done. You deserve a break. Husband should contribute. Leave it to him. They are his children also. The importance of me time or taking time out oneself is constantly reinforced with people sharing ideas and personal experiences. Deconstructing the good daughter-in-law wife. Societal and familial expectations from good daughter-in-law wife are important areas of discussions on the site. The patriarchal expectations, which become everyday stressors for women, are discussed through went-out posts or suggestion posts. Many of the women express complete frustration over the expectations of being superwoman or supermom without expecting anything in return. One woman had to put her frustrations with husband's complete disregard for her as stay-at-home mom, and he refuses to share the financial details with her. Post about in-laws' interference in personal lives or husband's reluctance to consult the partner, rather relying on his family to take decisions, overindulging the child, or constantly criticizing the mother's way of bringing up her children. The posts end with, "What should I do? How do I tackle this? How do I say it? Please help," demonstrates that the group is seen as a safe space for discussing personal and intimate stressors. The responses range from being supportive, a simple hug, facing similar situation, validating their frustrations and offering support. Another set of responses are encouragement and suggestions to be assertive, maintain a separate account, strongly take stand against child practices that do not match the parents' or mother's ideology. The idea is the mother, although struggling, knows best and has to bring up the child in the manner they deem appropriate. The selfhood of the mother is given importance rather than and the attempt is to deconstruct the notion of good mother, good woman, and good wife. Highlighting the political in everydayness. Highlighting things that are otherwise brushed under the carpet, silenced, are very important strategies which prioritize the self-respect in women in their everyday experiences. Resisting and inverting gendering strategies, laughter, opinion, and desires. Women of respectable families do not laugh or express sexual desire is the image that has been perpetuated in patriarchal cultures. This has been done by family members, community members, and popular media such as plays and films. In popular media, the depiction of a carefree woman as laughing and talking loudly is equated with irresponsibility, while responsible wife and mother is silent and smiling. She is busy taking care of the needs of her loved ones. The thin line between sanskari or cultured and unsanskari or uncultured is marked by this behavior. Women, especially mothers who have opinions, laugh, express desires, are judged for their morality and often shamed into behaving in a proper way. In a repressive culture, the online forum provides a space for women who are mothers to freely talk about their own sexual desires, friendly bantering or finding time to do it with children around, sharing of funny posts. These posts are often seen on weekly posts or suggestion posts. The online space provides women with flexible space to express themselves. There is a focus on importance of self-worth and self-esteem for women to be comfortable in their own skin and express themselves. These conversations are representations of freedom and agency that women who are mothers experience. In the words of Susan Sillemans, imagine the mother laughing. Resisting violence and abuse. Self-care, self-love and self-esteem are the most articulated when it comes to posts related to women facing violence or any form or abuse of any form. An important point of discussion remains that mothers should not choose to be in abusive relationship for the sake of their children. Most of the posts on violence and abuse are expressed in the form of anonymous posts, went out posts or suggestion posts. The moderators are extremely strict to ensure that there is no judgmental comment towards the person expressing the distress. Resources are immediately shared. The underlying idea is if the mother does not take care of herself, she will not be happy, and staying in violent and abusive marriages have negative impact on the mother as well as child's physical and mental health. It is important to speak out against violence and the abuse that women experience. One woman from the group who chose to walk out of an abusive marriage and then adopt a child is hailed as courageous, powerful, and strong. The stand of the group resonated with our ideological stand against violence and sacrosanct view of the institution of marriage. She calls the woman who is hailed as courageous, powerful, and strong, calls the group her support system. This is an idea constantly expressed, that the group is a support system, soul sisters, and first place to vent out. We also identify that the group provides us and many others what Lay refers to as social and therapeutic space. Affirmations and empowering language. An important aspect of the online forum is the discussion and posts on self-affirmations and using language that is empowering. Self-affirmations have an important role to play in self-care. Practicing that in our own lives was something that we did not consider important or necessary. We realized that saying positive things about oneself was considered as selfish and self-indulgent by us. This is a learned behavior from years of socialization and societal talk. This automatically had an impact on our self-talk also. It took mindfulness and continuous efforts for us to start working towards us. It still continues to be difficult for us, but the discussion made it easier for us to seek outside help for both physical and mental health. The online discussion did help to initiate and supplement the self-care process. Another important part of the discussion was the empowering language that is encouraged in the group. One of the posts went about responsibility of both parents, equal responsibility in caring, with the statement, "Is it too much to expect or am I overthinking?" The mother received immediate responses that provide emotional support. Another set of discussions was about engendered language, terms such as overthinking or overreacting. The discussions were based on the idea that women should believe in themselves and that this self-defeating language is used by patriarchal societies for women and by women to reinforce the construct of women as emotional beings who cannot take rational decisions. These terms are also used for gaslighting women, a form of emotional abuse where women are constantly made to believe that they are making mountains out of molds, when in reality the situation is not problematic as they think. The empowering language is a counter to this engendered language that helps women assert and believe in themselves. We have consciously tried to imbibe this empowering language and realize it is important to build self-esteem and confidence in women. Discussion. Mothering is tiring, dirty, mentally and physically draining, sleep depriving and extremely anxiety producing, along with being a fulfilling experience. Being part of an online group has supplemented our support system. This group that has become part of our everyday. The everyday discussions have validated frustrations, helped to make decisions, or has proven to be a space where one can understand, read, express differing point of views in a non-threatening way. By non-threatening, we do not mean a space which does not have differing views. It means a space where people have healthy engagements with systems in place to understand red flags. We have argued in the paper that self-care is an important part of empowered mothering, which believes in the autonomy and independence of mother and believes that being mother is one of the aspects of life. Self-care is intertwined with the ideas of self-esteem and self-worth. We highlight that self-care on online mothering groups is an important part of the discussion and considered essential for the well-being of the mother. The ideological position of being a feminist mothering group is an important part of positioning of self-care as essential to women. The personal position of all the members may not be same as the ideological positioning of the group, but the language used in the group is empowering and avoids engendered language that undermines the role of the mother and disrespects women. The online posts through their comments and posts reveal snippets of lived realities that deconstruct the patriarchal understanding of motherhood. The different kinds of posts provide a space for members to articulate, and we argue they become important ways through which women understand and demonstrate the importance of self-care. Self-care is in the form of personal care, standing up for oneself, asserting their rights, and safeguarding and believing in their self-worth. Being at peace oneself. It becomes possible when women take care of themselves, fight for their rights, and have support mechanisms, one of which is the online group. The experience of being part of a mothering group has taught us that self-care is a radical act of love, which can be demonstrated and articulated in a number of ways. This paper is based on our experience of being part of an online mothering group. We argue it opens further avenues for further research in this area.